Hello, welcome. Thank you for joining us here today. I'm excited to be with you for this conversation on empathy in action, trauma-informed de-escalation. I'm Nathan Gerbrandt, and I'm going to be your moderator for our time. I'm joining you from Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, on Treaty 1 territory, right near the meeting of the Red and the Assiniboine Rivers, a gathering place for Indigenous peoples, for community, for connection, for trade, for thousands of years. A very special location. Before I pass things on to Sherry, I would like to invite each of you to take a moment to introduce yourselves in the chat. Feel free, please say your name, and if you wish, where you are joining us from. As you're doing that, I'll let you know that the structure for our time is we'll have about a half an hour for a presentation from Sherry, and we'll finish our time with about 15 minutes of questions from you. So feel free, please pop your questions in the chat throughout our time. You don't have to wait to the end. I'll be watching the chat along with others from my CTRI team here, so thank you to the team. And I will bring these questions to Sherry for our final 15 minutes. I'll warn you, we won't get through all of our questions. There are a lot of us here, and I'm sure a lot of great questions to come. But rest assured, your questions, your resources you're sharing will not be in vain. We pay very close attention to the chat, and they serve as great further resources and ideas for our blog topics, for free resources like this, other community events, so don't hesitate. And as well, please, this is a community here, so share resources that others might benefit from. Next to Sherry. I've had the pleasure of working with Sherry Coburn for over 10 years now. I'll say she's been an inspiring trainer, a counselor, a leader in the field of mental health, addictions work, criminology, and de-escalation and workplace violence assessment training for that whole time. She's also the lead author of our newly revised trauma-informed de-escalating potentially violent situations workshop. She's been the contributing author for 2 of our published books, the Counseling in Relationships and Counseling Insights book. I always leave our conversations feeling impressed with her passion, her energy, her wit, her humor. I often leave thinking, that's a new way I hadn't thought about that before. I want to know more. I want more time with Sherry. So I am excited for our time and for you to have the opportunity to spend this time with Sherry. So Sherry, I'd like to turn it over to you. And say, why is this de-escalation course and this approach important for us today?
All right. So I think it's my turn to go. Is that correct, Nathan?
Yes, it's on to you, Sherry.
Excellent. All right. Well, as Nathan mentioned, thank you so much for taking time to join us today. We've done a significant and exciting revamp of our trauma-informed de-escalation. And so we just wanted to share with you some of the updates, right? Some of the updates that we've done, getting a bit excited. This is a 30-minute introductory invitation to come join us for our full day. There's train the trainer opportunities that are connected to this. And so we just want to share a little bit about sort of what's happening in the field of de-escalation and why it's important to sort of like visit this. And so we want to first and foremost start chatting about risk and responsibility. So we know that every environment is at risk for violence to occur. Whether you work in hospitality, retail, corrections, addictions, social services, healthcare, community, every environment is at risk for violence to occur. And so we truly believe that everybody should carry the skills to mitigate that risk. I think that we can all agree that over the last few years, we're feeling an intensity. We're feeling an intensity in people's energy. We're feeling an intensity in people's ability to sort of manage stressors. And so we really want to invite people to think about the role they can play in supporting people in mitigating the risk of violence to occur in your environment. And so we do know that we're not just feeling a change in terms of people's intensity and people's stress levels. We know that workplace violence has actually risen by 25% since 2015. We know that 1 in 5 people have experienced violence at work, and we know that this is both costly to employers and employees, whether it's through practical financial implications or just the psychological and emotional impacts of workplace violence and the risks that come with that. We very much wanted to begin to think about the risk of escalation and its link to trauma. We know that trauma-informed care is current best practice when we are working with and supporting other humans. And so we very much wanted to introduce that concept into our new and improved de-escalation framework. We can't really talk about the risk of violence and the intensity of people's angers and stress levels without really talking about the story and the history that everybody comes to the table with. Everyone has history and everyone has a story. And each day when we get up and we navigate the world, we carry that story with us. And at the end of the day, that story can influence how we interpret and react. And this matters as we interact and we provide different and various services to different individuals and we are supporting people. We want to be mindful that each time we are interacting with somebody, they bring that whole story with them. And in many, many ways, it would be so much easier to interact with people if we knew those stories. If people walked around with those stories written on them, everything that they did would make sense to us. Everything that we perceive to be an overreaction would make sense to us. Everything that we perceive to be an underreaction would make sense to us. Everything we think they should be doing that they're not doing, or that they are doing and they shouldn't be doing, would make sense to us if we could read the stories that people come to the table with and how those stories influence what is happening for us on a daily basis. We want to be mindful that in escalation, we don't always have an explanation for why somebody is escalating. We don't always have an understanding of why someone is escalating for the reasons that we think they are, or whether or not we think they're escalating and it makes sense to us. And so trauma-informed care tells us to just be mindful of that. Assume everybody's story is interacting in this present dynamic that's existing in an environment. Assume that if we knew and understood people's story, the way that they interpret to react to situations would actually make sense to us, even when it doesn't make sense to us. We know that when people have experienced early life stressors, we know that can continue to influence how they interact and how they engage in the world. We know that this can create hypersensitive nervous systems in people, and that can actually prime us to overreact or misinterpret situations based on historical references that our minds or our bodies are making. So we're not wrong. In many cases, people are hypersensitive. In many cases, people are potentially overreacting to the stressor that is in front of them. We're not imagining that. What we want to be mindful of is, in many cases, there's many, many more things that are influencing that reaction outside of the immediate stressor. And so when we engage in trauma-informed de-escalation, it allows us as the helper to regulate more effectively. And what I mean by that is that each time we're interacting with someone else, our stories are interacting. And if someone is escalating and their anger is taking over a space, we very quickly can get attached to that. It can activate our own nervous systems and put our own nervous systems into our own survival response. One of the beautiful things that we know is that when someone is escalating, whether that escalation makes sense to us or whether it doesn't, they're telling us that they are in their fight survival response. That is a piece of knowledge that is important. That what we want to remember is that the behavior that's existing in front of us is in many cases linked to someone's nervous system and their fight survival response. And our ability to respond to that and not react to that is actually key. Because when someone's survival response is activated, in the case of de-escalation, their fight response, it actually invites our nervous system to join in on that response. It actually wants to attach to our nervous system and invite our escalation as well, or at least invite a survival response to manage this escalation. That is not helpful in the case of de-escalation. We do not want two people's survival responses attempting to quiet the fight survival in one person. This is where co-regulation in the de-escalation process becomes imperative. That in order to successfully de-escalate or significantly increase the likelihood of a successful de-escalation, one person needs to be able to regulate their own nervous system and then invite the person whose survival response is activated into that more regulated space. And ultimately, the term for that is co-regulation. In order for de-escalation to increase, the likelihood of de-escalation to increase, we need to be able to invite somebody who's escalating out of their survival response and join us in our more regulated space. The risk in all of that and what can make de-escalation complicated is that our stories can easily start interacting with each other. And as I mentioned, we now all of a sudden have sort of two interacting stories or two survival responses attempting to regulate each other, which actually will not work. So one of the significant components of a successful de-escalation is actually being able to regulate as the de-escalator and then invite the person who's escalating into that more regulated space. There are sort of two arenas that we know, or ways that we can frame up the decreased or increased likelihood that violence will occur. Enablers are things that we know can feed violence, and inhibitors are things that we know can starve violence. At the end of the day, us as the de-escalator, we can be enablers or we can be inhibitors. And many of us have probably had that experience where you've watched somebody escalate somebody unnecessarily, or maybe just not de-escalate them. So you've observed somebody, they're engaging with someone who is angry, and the things that they're doing, the things that they're saying, the way that they're being with that person is not increasing the likelihood that that person will be able to quiet the intensity of their anger. An inhibitor is a de-escalator, someone who can actually get themselves in the right mind and body mindset to quiet the intensity of someone else's anger. It sounds very simple, except when someone is angry, each of us have different reactions to that. So I might immediately want to escalate as well. Someone else may want to just run away from somebody else's anger. Someone else might profusely apologize when someone is angry. And others of us will freeze when someone is angry because it just sets our survival response into a freeze mentality or a freeze physiology. And so an inhibitor of violence is something that starves violence. And as a de-escalator, I want to be an inhibitor. So I want to be able to quiet my own nervous system, quiet my own reaction to someone else's violence, and then ultimately use that more quieted energy to invite somebody out of their escalation. Many of us have been doing this in many environments successfully, where we have successfully supported somebody in lessening their anger, where we have communicated with someone in such a way that they were able to calm themselves down or to get calmed down with us. And so the ultimate goal of de-escalation is to be an inhibitor, to be a presence in this dynamic and in this interaction that actually increases the likelihood that this person will be able to quiet the intensity of their anger or re-regulate or restabilize. we do not have control over anyone. That is incredibly important to remember. We do not take responsibility for someone else's use of violence. What de-escalation is inviting us to use our influence to decrease the likelihood that violence occurs. That's what de-escalation is. And many of us have successfully done that in multiple roles. I have worked from hospitality to the service industry to retail to corrections. And what I can tell you, in all of those environments, I have been an inhibitor of violence, someone who was able to invite the quieting of an intensity of its situation. And I've also had experiences in my career where I was an enabler. I was not able to sort of get my own self-regulated, quiet my own reaction to somebody else's anger, and get myself in a space where I could actually invite them into a less intense interaction. So I have never taken, nor will I take, and nor should you, the responsibility of someone else using violence. But I do really like knowing that I have influence over intense dynamics. I like knowing that what I bring to the table can decrease the likelihood of violence. And I have had that experience in multiple arenas of my career and feel much more confident engaging with people who have rich stories, who have histories of trauma, who have histories of using violence, that I've been able to keep myself safe over the course of my 25-year career using the strategies, the connection strategies that we talk about. We felt it was really important to talk about the connection between connection and de-escalation, because at the end of the day, our nervous systems are contagious to each other. If your survival response goes, my survival response wants to join you. It takes intentional and thoughtful effort to not get sucked into the vortex of somebody else's survival response. Our survival responses are incredibly helpful when there is actually safety. They are not helpful when they get activated in situations that may have a degree of stress, but are not life-threatening. And so this is what we're talking about when we're talking about people's stories showing up in escalation. We're talking about sort of a pre-programmed survival response that can show up even in moments where something is not life-threatening, but it's showing up and interpreting the situation as life-threatening. The situation can be misinterpreted as life-threatening based on previous trauma stories or previous programming to our survival responses. And so can our minds misinterpret. So our bodies can misinterpret, our minds can misread when we have a pre-programming, or ultimately what we can refer to as the survival switch has gotten stuck in the on position. And this ultimately helps us understand why people can escalate in situations that don't really require the level of intensity or escalation that's showing up. The antidote to escalation is connection. So we know that escalation is a survival response. We know that when someone is in their survival response, they can't naturally connect to another human because their body and their mind is focused on survival. And so the de-escalator is there to invite connection, to use their nervous system to invite the escalating person into connection. And when your survival response wants to activate my survival response, I'm going to use my regulated nervous system to actually invite your nervous system to join me. That requires me not escalating. That requires me not getting activated into my survival response. It requires the way that I think and the way that I feel to be under my influence. So I have to be strategic and I have to be intentional. I have to be very mindful that my body isn't getting sucked into your survival fight response. I have to notice when my head is saying things like, I don't have time for this. I don't know what to do about this. I don't agree with what you're saying. You're wrong. I need to be right. If you just understood, all the things that somebody's fight response can sort of drag out of us, we have to strategically not allow that to happen. And that comes with a desire to remain curious to the person who's escalating in front of us. That sounds simple until somebody's escalating. And so the connection strategies that we talk about in our full day workshop are about how do you quiet the intensity of your own response when somebody else is escalating, because two escalating people will not de-escalate, or two dysregulated people will not create a regulated outcome. The connection has to occur. My nervous system can connect to yours and quiet the intensity of your survival response. And a successful de-escalation does not necessarily mean everybody leaves happy. It means that the situation ends with violence not having occurred. And so the goal of connection is not necessarily to build a friendship or to build an alliance or to build a lifelong a connection point. The goal of connection is to make the other person's survival response quiet, to remind the other person's nervous system, the escalating person's nervous system, that this is not a life-threatening situation. And so we want to be mindful that enablers feed violence and inhibitors starve violence. Enablers are anything that increases the risk of violence. Anything. So it can be that you work in an environment that serves alcohol. That's an enabler. It increases the risk of violence because it reduces inhibitions. Enablers can be that you have money on site, you have pharmaceuticals on site, you work 24/7 crisis, you work in an environment that supports people who are under stress or struggling. So an enabler is anything. It can be a dimly lit parking lot. An enabler is anything that feeds violence, and an inhibitor is anything that quiets the risk. And so in the case of de-escalation, we want the de-escalator to be an inhibitor. Other inhibitors can include that you've got a great workplace violence policy, that you have a healthy workplace. Other inhibitors of violence are you have a brightly lit parking lot, that you provide services that people are voluntary to. So everything in the point of de-escalation, the individual inhibitor that I'm talking about is the de-escalator. And at the end of the day, we do not want to be an enabler. And most of us can probably admit that at times we've been enablers, right? At times, maybe we've been a little patronizing or a bit condescending, or maybe we try to logic people out of their emotions, that we believe if they just understood the policy, they'd actually calm down. And so sometimes we're intentionally enabling. Maybe we're being a little bit rude. Maybe we're being a little bit dismissive. Maybe we're rolling our eyes because we just don't get why someone is upset. Those are intentional enablers. But we also can unintentionally enable. Sometimes we engage in ways and behave in ways that we don't realize increase risk, or maybe we just don't have the self-awareness just yet to know that we might communicate and engage in ways that can actually further activate somebody's nervous system. And so much about this new and improved de-escalation is a lot about building our own capacity as de-escalators to be the most efficient tool in the room to de-escalate a situation, to build our confidence, to build our capacity, where we can go into situations where someone is escalating and feel like, you know what, I have influence over this. I feel like I can influence this in the right direction. I feel confident. I've got some skills. I feel like I can build a connection with this, even though they are escalating. That is difficult. It takes practice. It takes intention. It takes thoughtfulness, caution, curiosity, compassion, all the good stuff, which is easy to do when things are stabilized, not as easy to do when situations are escalating. Another always core concept in the element of de-escalation is the concept of safety. And so disengagement is in fact part of the framework. And that's ultimately an awareness that the de-escalator has to have, that despite sort of doing strategic and intentional efforts to de-escalate the situation, there isn't a notable decline in the escalation. And in order to even notice that, you have to be grounded in your own regulation. That sometimes if we are pulled into the vortex of escalation, we won't even notice that things are escalating. And that can be problematic in the de-escalation process. So even the ability for the de-escalator to sort of notice, okay, I'm noticing that even though I'm trying different things and I'm engaging really strategically and I'm engaging really intentionally, I'm noticing my efforts are not decreasing the intensity of the situation. And so now I need to think about disengaging. And so if an escalation continues and you are, as an effective de-escalator, aware that it is not quieting despite your best efforts, then what is your disengagement strategy? Is there an opportunity here to politely end the conversation? Is there an opportunity here that requires a warning? Is this a situation in which an abrupt exit would be reasonable? Is this a situation where authorities or security need to be contacted to intervene? And even an effective de-escalation reads the room, right? So an effective de-escalation is even knowing when to pull the plug on your escalation efforts. So much of our full day chats about the content of our trauma responses and the influence of our fight response on the people and the energies around us, our own abilities as de-escalators to manage our own survival responses when an escalation is occurring, chatting about just learning how to better read a room, noticing the enablers in a room, noticing the inhibitors in a room, and being able to strategically use those things. Being able to build connection with someone, even when their nervous system is trying or working against them in rejecting that connection and telling them to escalate. So many good things are part of this full day workshop. My hope is that we've whet your palate a little bit, that you would be wanting and willing to come join us. There is no time that has been more fitting than now to learn how to support people in managing their anger, keeping ourselves safe, and also being able to support other people in not using violence, and decreasing the likelihood of them also having to experience the outcomes that come when we use violence. Absolutely. Please visit our website. There is some wonderful resources. We absolutely want to invite you. This is the most transferable workshop for any service that provides a service to humans. So I absolutely want to open up the opportunity for chats and questions. And so let's invite that.
Thank you, Sherry. I'm always inspired by the depth of how you get into all the details and the nuance of connection and appreciating another person's story. We've had a few questions come through here. This idea of enablers and inhibitors is one that I know you and I have chatted about a bunch of times, and those aren't always common terms that I think we use when we think about, interaction and whatnot. But I know we both like them and we both come back to those. And so I wonder if we can, and you've given some, I think, concrete examples and just really emphasized the inhibitor. That's what we want to do. We want to bring sort of that approach, that philosophy. And there's a host of concrete little things that I think you've touched on a bit already. I teach this course too, as you know, and whenever I'm working with the group, it's always that kind of the concrete, the strategy. How do we connect? How do we validate? And I wonder if you can even go a little more about some of those things that you've maybe done with your body language or your how you fight, or if you can kind of go in a few more details just to kind of round out what you're meaning by inhibitor.
Yes. So one of the things that I have found to be one of the most valuable inhibitors, which is anything that decreases the likelihood that violence will occur, is feelings before facts. Right? It's validate somebody's feelings and recognize that validating does not mean agreeing. So just because I validate the way that you're feeling, it doesn't mean that I agree with the way that you're behaving. It doesn't mean that I agree. And I think sometimes as humans, we hesitate to validate because we don't agree with the behavior. And we get concerned that if we validate the emotion, that we are also agreeing with the behavior. But there are absolutely ways to validate without agreeing. Also, you're never going to logic somebody out of their emotion. So reminding them of a policy, reminding them of a procedure, reminding them, so avoiding meet the feeling with a feeling. And be mindful of when you're trying to logic someone out of their emotion. And so I would say a core inhibitor is feelings before facts, and a core inhibitor is learning how to validate a feeling comfortably without your mind allowing you to tell you that if I validate this person's feeling, I'm somehow agreeing with their behavior. I think that in many cases, we are accidental enablers because we're doing our best not to validate.
Absolutely. Yes. I know a phrase we've used sometimes is explaining is not about excusing.
Right.
Or,
yes.
And even seeking to understand doesn't mean we give permission. So some other questions we've had that I'll just note around, we do this course as a train the trainer. Some people have been asking about that. And is it the same approach getting layered into that? And absolutely. All the courses that we teach, all our de-escalation courses, bring in this trauma-informed appreciation of regulating and connecting to another person's kind of baseline, and also focusing on ourselves. And I'll even just emphasize that the trauma-informed nature we often think is about, that other person's and their trauma story. It's just as much about our own and how we are gentle with our own emotions, and how we understand that there are times where maybe I just got to excuse myself from this, or there's some other contextual realities that I don't have this today, or I need a little more help, or I need to kind of dial in and know a bit more what pushes my buttons in this situation. So knowing yourself and where you're at emotionally in your baseline is paramount here. We've had a question about holds and restraints. Sherry, I wonder if you can talk a little bit about, is that part of this course? Do we go into that, the physicality of that? Or is there any physicality aspects to this course?
So the only physicality aspect to this course is your use of your body language. This is not a holds and restraints course. It is not a self-defense course. It's very much about capitalizing on our influence before any type of physical contact would need to be made. And that's very intentional. And it's very intentional because many of us have worked in helping professions, human professions, and had much, much, much success without using physical contact. So it's not to minimize or mitigate the value that other trainings can have that invite us into holds and restraints. It's rather to celebrate the use of connection in de-escalation.
Yes, absolutely. We have another question here, which is an interesting one. And I'm going to read it word for word here. How do you de-escalate without the person knowing you are using de-escalation tools? So, for example, what if the person says, don't use your psychology on me? What do you think about
that? I love that question. And I think what it boils down to is being authentic and genuine. And I've often had people sort of challenge me and say, well, if you're using these strategies and if you're using these tools, how can that be authentic and genuine? Because it's sort of this prefab of connection strategies that you're pulling from. And my easy response to that is the genuine and authentic desire to help somebody calm down. That the strategies can be applied in disingenuine ways and they won't work. And when we maintain our true desire to look across at somebody and think, I don't want you to use violence, not just for me, but for you. I truly want to support you in quieting the survival response that you're in right now. And so I'm genuinely doing things that I think could work. The other thing is, if someone says to you, don't use your psychology on me, they've just given you a valuable piece of information, which is whatever you were just doing wasn't working. So try something different. Because one of the things that we love about this course is that it invites us into multiple skills. And so with each individual, you might try 4 and they don't work, and you try 6 and they do. And so the ability to pivot and read the room and see when something is working with somebody, but also see when it's not. So it's a great piece of intel when someone says, don't pull your psychology on me, because whatever skill you were just doing, move away from it. And in this workshop, you'll get 15 or 20 others to pull from.
Yeah, absolutely. Confrontation, right? The confrontation happens when someone's escalated and they may yell at you and they'll try and push your buttons, but it happens when someone sees you as the enemy. They've like othered you. So I think a key piece is your goal as a de-escalator from the first point when you're aware that this is going on, you've entered a charged interaction, is to generate evidence to the contrary, right? I'm not your enemy. We're in this together. So when you kind of come alongside and you try and find ways to connect, you emphasize each other's humanities, you bring names, people want that. That's often when people are in that emotional state, they felt their dignity or something's been taken from them, and now you're giving it back. And you'll find, I think that really is one of the most profound ways that I think find people that co-regulation begins to happen. We've got another question here, a couple questions I'm going to put together, asking about, Sherry, do you want to respond to that? Oh.
Yeah, I'm thinking we might be leaning into the same one, which is asking about youth and children and whether or not these are transferable. I don't know if that's where you were going.
Yeah, why don't we go there?
But I would say absolutely. I would say in the case of youth and children, there would be some adaptations for sure, which the workshop absolutely allows for inviting that conversation about how might we tweak these to better fit with children or adults. But one of the things we know for sure about what is it, that that children are significantly more sensitized to energy and interpreting their worlds through energy. And so that is something that we would significantly reinforce across the board with all ages, but particularly with children. The same way that that adults can get contagious with each other's, children are even more sensitive to an elevation in the people who are supporting them. And this is why kids do better with some adults and not as great with other adults. In many cases, it's about the energy.
Thank you, Sherry. Some of that didn't come through, and maybe I'll just add a little more in that this course, while it can be expanded to address whether you're in a client-serving role, whether you work in a public-facing, and you're just like a bylaw officer and you're not actually in a client, vulnerable person or helping relationship, but also with children, what I've really found to be, an essential thing to realize is like the development of a child's brain space, higher level thinking is at a different place, right? And so what can you do to bring in other ways of connect that involve you looking at sensory needs? So where's this person at in terms of how much sleep they've had, where they've had food? How do you change the environment? How do you bring in elements that get at some of the sensory needs that can then the physicality of allowing that person to help ground themselves? So that works very much, and we can adapt this course to focus more on children. I'll also note we have another course specifically that takes the same approach, but it's called De-escalating Children and Youth in Crisis. So we'll go a lot more into some of the details and realities around how you think about emotional regulation, co-regulation for children. We've got just a couple minutes left. We've had a couple questions on Train the Trainer, and are you certified to train this course within your organization? The answer is yes. We will take people through learning how the course unfolds and then bring in presentation skills, with some coaching, to then also practice delivering the course, and then find a way that you can harness your strengths, your voice, your experiences, your setting, and then draw the course materials to your place. And so we work very collaboratively. It's a 3-day program. And then, yes, you get certified to deliver this course to your workplace. Maybe one final question. We've got some people asking about, would this course work with a team of counselors? And maybe I'm wondering if you could respond a little more to that, if you're working with a team of counselors, or maybe with a group of people that don't have that counseling relationship-based role. And recognizing, Sherry, you have 1 minute to answer that.
I think I truly stand by the fact this is one of the most transferable workshops that I facilitate. Whether you are in frontline helping roles, counseling, I think everybody should have these skills, whether you're using them at the grocery store or whether you're using them in a formal workplace. They have served me across multiple different arenas. And so I'm confident that building these skills, building this awareness is only going to make you more effective, whether it's with friends, family, foes, or anybody in between.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Sherry. I'm not sure if you can share your final slide. We're going to thank you and move into our closing mode, but I wanted to say wonderful questions here. We have a whole host of those. I have people that are going to take note of those, copying them down before we lose them. And like I said, they will go into blog topics and further resources that we can send out. And a reminder that everybody who signed up for this session, you will receive emailed to you a guide. We've got a condensed version of this course that you'll get through mail. It's a multiple page, kind of very visually appealing, kind of with some of the specific strategies that Sherry outlined. So you'll see these are some of the additional resources that we have. I invite you, please, if you want more, sign up for our newsletter, our subscription. You'll get information that way around free or discounts to further workshops, and access to our blog that gets out weekly, and free webinars that go out once in a month. So yeah, so please, I encourage you, have a review through our site. We offer a host of different staff training opportunities. If you're looking at maybe an organizational trauma-informed care assessment, we can do that. We have professional consultants within our mix that can get more involved in culture transformation. I'll highlight last, one of the things I'm most excited about right now is the development of a very unique two-eyed seeing approach to developing resources, trainings, retreats for Indigenous people, for non-Indigenous organization, and it brings together the strengths of Indigenous culture and ways of being and healing and thinking with Western sort of clinical ways of healing. We call those programs Guida Binamin, Guido Sendamin, and those are Ojibwe words that mean we sit together or we walk together. So I'll close by sharing the next time we are gathering in this way for a 45-minute free webinar. Will be in a month on July 15th. And my esteemed colleague, Wendy Lowen, will be delivering that topic. And it'll be a curiosity in action, creating culture of trust and innovation. So please mark that in your calendars. July 15th, 1 p.m. Central Time. There'll be information sent out on that. So thank you all for attending and participating in this conversation.